Okay, everybody, thanks for making it back from the break, and welcome to this session on bridging data quality and data use. My name is Anna Whitson. I'm a member of the EADI Secretariat sitting at UNDP in New York, and I'm an outreach and partnership specialist for the EADI Secretariat. So I'm really happy to be moderating this, I think, really interesting and important session. We're pretty jam-packed with content actually in this session. So I think as people just trickle in back from the break, we'll just go ahead and get started. Just a quick note, thank you so much to all the speakers and organizers of this session. They really worked really hard to, I think, put together something very interesting and really useful for this community. You can see everyone's titles here, but I'm sure as they speak throughout the session, they will go ahead and introduce themselves. So I will kind of leave that for now, and we'll introduce everyone as they come through to speaking. So let's dive in then to the agenda of what this session is all about today. So quickly walking you through kind of what we're going to be covering and what the kind of rationale for having this session during the virtual community exchanges. So we're going to kind of be talking in two different building blocks of content. The first, we'll be talking about kind of a reality check of current obstacles to data use. So we're going to be hearing from two of our speakers, Dilli from Nepal and Henry from Nigeria, about their real experiences on the ground at the country level as partner country governments trying to use EADI data. So trying to kind of walk us through some of the challenges that they have in using EADI data as it's kind of originally intended. The second building block is kind of be this call and response reality check. So, we've heard from the data users, what are their challenges? Now let's hear kind of from the data publishers about, why some of those challenges might exist, how we can kind of work together to overcome those challenges. So we're going to hear from our colleagues, Michelle at IOM, and so here at AFDB, as well as our colleague, Mark Bruff, who's an advisor for the ODI Budget Strengthening Initiative in Liberia. So each presentation is separated by a bit of a Q&A with the audience, where again, we're going to try to source comments or questions from you if anything is unclear. So you'll have lots of time to ask questions, and please, as we noted, just do pop those in the chat box once they come into your brain. So just talking a little bit before we get into the presentations about a little bit more in depth about what we're trying to do here. We're really trying to connect the data quality and the data use kind of communities, the two sides of the same coin, and really trying to kind of, I know we use this word a lot, but cross-fertilize between the communities so that we understand a little bit better where each other is coming from, and we can work together to find solutions. So I think we've heard in a lot of the sessions today, these really key linkages between EADI data use and data quality. And that's really where we're trying to kind of explore today. So we really want this to be a frank discussion between publishers and data users in regards to these linkages and these blockages. So we definitely want to hear from you. And we should think about this session as, a start to this discussion and not an end. So really, this is a starting discussion for us to take these points forward, whether that's on EADI Connect, in further virtual community exchanges, or even feeding into us at the Secretariat on things that we can do to support the kind of twin aims of data quality and data use going forward. So I think we're going to start off with a little bit of an ice-breaking poll. So I'm sure you guys have all done a lot of these polls today, but before we dive in, we just want to kind of assess who is in the room so we can kind of understand where everybody's sitting. So there are multiple answers possible, obviously, and I'm going to just read them quickly so that the interpretation picks them up. But do you consider yourself, first and foremost, a data user, a data publisher, brand new to EADI and kind of don't know where you fit in yet, or none of the above? So we'll go ahead and just give it a quick couple seconds. It looks like we've got over half of people voting now, but I think this is really useful for us to know kind of who's in the room, the level of expertise everyone has. Great, so maybe we'll just give it 2 more seconds. Perfect, okay, great. So it looks like we've got a pretty good split actually. So 45% of you would consider yourself primarily data users. 55% of you would consider yourself primarily data publishers. 30% are new to EADI, so welcome and thank you so much for attending. And then 6% kind of not sure exactly where they fit. So we've got a good mix of people in the room, so hopefully that will lead to some really interesting discussion. With that, all that introduction, I think we will jump into the meat of the session now. So we will go to this kind of building block 1. So this is the kind of obstacles to data use portion of the presentation. So just again, if you have any comments or questions, drop them in the chat box and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. So our first presenter is going to be Dilli Raj Lichak. I'm sorry, Dilli, for probably butchering your name, who is the Undersecretary of the International Economic Cooperation Coordination Division in the Ministry of Finance of Nepal. He's also an incoming EADI governing board member, so representing partner countries and data users on the governing board, and also oversees, his role oversees the data quality portfolio on the governing board. So I think this first presentation is really meant to provide some contextual background for further discussion on how to overcome data use issues. But concretely, what we're hoping to hear from Dilli and from Nepal is, why is EADI data important for Nepal? What do you think are the key data use challenges that Nepal has encountered when trying to use EADI data? And what would be some concrete steps forward that you would see in kind of overcoming those challenges? So with that, I will welcome Dilli and thank you so much and hand over for him to make his presentation.
Thank you, Anna, for your introduction and welcome. Thanks for inviting me as a guest speaker in this very important session that is Virtual Community Exchange, IATA. And I will be representing the partner country constituency. And I will be sharing the experiences, why IATA is important to us, and what we are doing, and what are the challenges and the problems we are facing to integrate or to use this IATA platform. This slide generally talks how I'll be going, and it's just the objective of the forum. I just repeated it. You can go next slide, please. Yes, this slide talks about the importance of data and to strengthen the development process, to accelerate the development results, and to enhance the mutual accountability between the development partners, the governments, and all the stakeholders involved in the development process. And the IATA's dual purpose of increasing the transparency and accountability, along with the use of aid data for research, analysis, and decision making. So this is from the IATA's perspectives. And the potential at the country level, or for example, for the users like us, what we expect is the IATA supplements or validates the existing government data that we already have in our system. So how can we match this expectation? That is the real concern for us. These are the 3 challenges that we can say for using this IATA platform. One is the data access. So the problem is how to navigate this IATA platform, because there are 3 different portals. That is the G portal, the development finance data portal, and the data store. So these 3 different portals, how they differ differently, or how they can be synchronized to get to some sort of comparison or some sort of usefulness for the country level. This is one of the challenge that we face regarding the access. And the second one is the complementarity. As I already said, our expectation is to make this IATA data complementary or that can validate the national data that we have already. Because the problem is there are different reporting mechanisms from the development partners, as well as the standards, the IATA standards, and also there are some differences regarding the reporting procedures, maybe in terms of fiscal years differences, or maybe in terms of units. So there are some differences. So how to complement this IATA data with our national systems, that is our another major challenge. And regarding data quality, that is also an issue for us. And the data quality will be handled by Henry. He will be talking about the quality issue later on. So the next is the how can we move forward so that this IRT would be not only complementary to us, but would be useful to us and would also be helpful to validate our national system. So one can be the advocacy, knowledge sharing, and peer learning like this platform that you can use to know from each other how other countries are using it and how other countries are integrating the ERT data in their national systems. So that may be one. Another one, the interactive courses that ERT can conduct through this ERT Connect to the different stakeholders, including the partner country organizations. And another one is the tailored country engagements, like the country who are interested, like us, who are interested to integrate the ERT system and use the ERT system. So how ERT can engage in our efforts. So this may be another way forward. And another one is the facilitating dialogues between different stakeholders, including the governments, the development partners, and other civil society organizations, and so on. And finally, I would like, as a representative of data users and partner country constituency, I'd like to call on the publishers to focus on the quality issue of the data, and also to the members and all the constituencies to share experiences regarding this ERT data uses, and also highlight if there are any quality issues, please highlight that so that there can be improvements in the data so that this is acceptable to all and can be used by the wider communities. So with this, I thank once again, and I will hand over to Anna. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you so much, Dilli. I think that was really useful. And just to thank you also for that last slide, which I think presented some really concrete steps on way forward. The advocacy, interactive courses, tailored country engagement, and facilitating dialogue. I think these are all really great ideas that I think we could build on in this session and going forward about, the ways in which we can start to kind of bridge these data use and data quality gaps. So thanks for keeping that very tangible. So I don't know if anyone has any questions for Dilli. I don't see anything in the chat box right now, but maybe we can move on to Henry's presentation. And then afterward, hopefully some of you will have popped some questions for Dilli and Henry into the chat. And we can take a few minutes to look at those then. So just wanted to introduce then our next presenter from the data use side, who is Henry Asor. He is a development assistance database manager from Nigeria, the Ministry of Finance, Budget, and National Planning, and is also a governing board member representing Nigeria on the governing board of IADI as well. So I think in Henry's intervention, what we're really interested to hear is kind of a little bit more granular level from his experience in using IADI data in Nigeria. What are the key kind of data gaps that he's looking at? What are the key quality issues that he's seeing at the country level as he's really attempting to use this data in a very tangible way? And potentially any ideas for how this could be mitigated on the publishing side, which will then hopefully provide a bit of a bridge into the next part of this session, which is really hearing from the publishers in response to these presentations. So with that, I think I will hand over to Henry. So Henry, thank you so much, and over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the globe. My name is Henry Asor. I'm the Development Assistance Database Manager with the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning in Nigeria. By way of introduction, in Nigeria, we are using IRT data in the government to inform annual national budget planning, quarterly monitoring of external resource flows to ensure development partners are delivering on commitments, quarterly calculation of balance of payments, and annual preparation of the Development Cooperation Report. As a long-standing member of the IRT community and now governing board member, I know that This was the primary goal of IIT from the beginning, for IIT data to be used by partner country governments. And in our experience in Nigeria, there is considerable potential for using IIT data for this purpose. However, in trying to use the data, we consistently encounter a number of issues that can make it challenging to use the data confidently and without time-consuming processes to check data with development partner offices in country. I'd like to highlight a few of those issues that we have seen in the hopes that publishers can consider how to help in addressing them. Now, what is the data quality issue and why does it matter? Organizations do not always report all categories of financial data. In early February 2021, we pulled the data from IATI's new tool, the Country Development Finance Data Tool, to assess Q4 2020 spending. The tables we have included as examples are from this data set. This table shows reporting of commitments and spending. And as you can see on the slide, some organizations with large portfolios don't report one or two fields of data. This makes it very difficult to assess predictability, which is a key metric that we monitor at the country level. Now, why does quality issue matter? Not all organizations report the aid type in their transactions. In 2020, as you can see in the slide, 10% of resources were unallocated to aid type. It's critical that this is reported for budgets, commitments, and spending so that we can assess the modality that development partners are using to deliver their resources. This is particularly important for large donors. When we shared this data with the Central Bank of Nigeria for use in calculating the balance of payment, their primary concern was this gap in information on aid type and finance type. Now, similar to aid type, not all organizations report finance type in their transactions. For example, in 2020, 10% of resources were unallocated to finance type. And as with aid type, it's critical this information is reported, as receiving a loan compared to a grant means very different things for the government of Nigeria. And while it's possible to assume that many of these smaller organizations provide grants, this is not the case for larger organizations. This information also needs to be consistent with the debt data we have at the country level. To inform national budget planning, we need to know what sectors are being targeted. While we have our own sector categorizations in Nigeria, we are able to map the OECD sectors to our sectors. But when this information is not available, we are not able to get a full picture of resources targeting each sector, which makes it difficult for the government to use the data to determine how to allocate national resources. Now, other gaps that we have identified in Nigeria as a whole includes variation in how publishers publish. Now, in Nigeria, we need to know how the resources are allocated across the country. As these resources supplement those allocated in the national budget, this information is critical to make sure the overall resources, that is external and national, are meeting the identified resource needs in these areas. Now, take variations in how publishers publish. In using data from IATI, it is often clear that publishers are publishing data very differently. For our purposes, we need consistency so that we can confidently combine the data. It will be very difficult for us to become experts in how each organization publishes and then adapt our analysis based on this variation. Now, other gaps include double counting. This is always a concern at the country level. Even in data reported in our local aid information management systems, but in IATI, because so many implementing partners or organizations also report to IATI, it is often very difficult to be sure that we are not double counting. One other gap is timeliness. Now, we know that all publishers have different internal processes, and ability to report data. But consistency in frequent reporting is key to making the data useful in Nigeria. When we produced the Development Cooperation Report last year, it was difficult to know how complete the data was, as it is unclear when organizations report. For example, when we pulled the data in February of this year to look at Q4 spending for 2020, we would hope that most organizations had published their full 2020 spending, but it's not possible to know this. And this makes it difficult to be confident in the completeness of the data. So in conclusion, we are already using IRT data in many different ways, and we find considerable potential for it to be used in many countries. But addressing some of these key issues are key to building confidence by partner countries to use IRT data. So we welcome this conversation and look forward to discussing this further. Thank you all for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Henry. I know Henry's been in and out with some internet issues, but I think that was super useful. I really applaud both presentations from both these presenters. I think it's very useful, at least from my perspective, to see these very kind of granular issues that Henry and others at the country level are kind of coming up against, so that we really know where we need to make change and where we can hopefully, make progress and bridge, the data user and the publisher perspective here. So I think this is super useful. And then I just wanted to also call out this comment that a few people, Johanna and a few plus ones from the other side are kind of making in the comment box about maybe having some of these gaps and issues that Henry and others are kind of bringing to the fore together in some kind of checklist, which publishers can kind of self-assess themselves. And also to have that information to present to management colleagues, et cetera, so they can understand the impact of the data quality issues. So I think it's a really great idea, and maybe we can discuss kind of further on in the session when we come to maybe some concrete outcomes. But I think these are the kind of things we really want to hear from you all about what you think would be useful to, incentivize better publishing or make the data more useful. So thank you so much for that comment. I think that's a really a great one, and something we can hopefully come back to at the end of the session when we talk a little bit more about concrete ways forward. So I think just in the interest of time, we'll move on quickly to the block 2 of the presentation, which is hearing from the publishers on the other side of the coin. So, some of the realities they face when they're trying to publish their data, trying to do, their best to make it useful, quality data, and some of the kind of things they're coming up against, and also, a kind of a rebuttal or response to what we heard from Dilli and Henry. So again, please feel free to put comments or questions into the comment box, and we can address those after the presentations. So just introducing our third presenter, which I'm sure many of you know, Michelle, who is the Senior Project Manager at IOM, will give a short presentation on kind of a response to, based on these key data use issues, what is she seeing, what is she encountering on the publishing side when it kind of comes to mitigating some of those issues. So with that, I think we'll hand over to you, Michelle, and thank you so much in advance.
Okay, thank you. I don't have detailed slides to go through. When we were talking about this session, we talked about having the groups come together. I honestly felt like I don't want to be out here making excuses as to why people like Dilli and Henry are having problems, because that's not really what the session is for. And what Sohir, who is one of the planners, rightly pointed out is we really all are all in the same boat. So we have our little IATI, the SSIATI here, to show that some of the data use challenges that have been expressed by Henry and by Dilli are the same ones we as publishers have. So the reality is we might see ourselves as two sides of the same coin, but really any one of us who are publishers are data users as well. So keeping that in mind, I want to make sure that we're looking at this in a positive way. Whether you are a new publisher or a longtime publisher, whether you are a large organization, government or multilateral, or a small local NGO as publishers, we are also a very diverse group of publishers, which makes it very hard to find a one-size-fits-all situation. I'm hoping that this session is just the beginning of the journey in this boat together, and not really the beginning. It's been going on for a while, but really allows us with a way to figure out, as Johanna has pointed out in the chat, you know, are there checklists? What are the things we can do to bridge the gap? And so that's really what we're trying to do here. And really, you know, I just want to point out, as a publisher, I know that's my goal. And when I look at some of the specific comments that Dilli and Henry pointed out, the initial and the continuing primary goal of IATI has always been to provide quality data to any of this in a standard format to any data user. Obviously the partner countries being a big one. The challenge is trying to meet all of those needs. And just as Henry pointed out on behalf, you know, in the partner countries, it's impossible for them to really get an understanding of how the differences that every one of us as publishers is going to be publishing. We might put a tag in one place, or we put something at an activity level versus a transaction level, and it's hard for them to figure out exactly how our data works. But on the flip side, it's also hard for us to know if the requirements are different for every partner country. How do we find the commonality in all of that, and how do we address all of that? For organizations like my own, I'm at IOM. We also have donors that give us money that have requirements. So we sit in between two constituents of data users, and we need to be able to address that. So I think it's a challenge again on both sides, and finding that common ground is really key. I also know that as a grand bargain signatory, you know, trying to reduce the number of reports that we have to create is one of the big and reporting requirements. I know for IATI, for most publishers, I haven't heard, and I'd be interested in the chat, has anyone really reduced their reporting requirements? For many of us, IATI is an additive to our work, and we haven't yet cracked the nut on how to eliminate, you know, FTS reporting or OECD reporting, and using IATI as that one data shop. So there are a lot of constituents that we still have to deal with, and whether you're large or small, that additive aspect can provide constraints for some of the publishers. As I mentioned, there's over 1,200 publishers out there, and we come in all shapes and sizes. The small publishers may struggle with disaggregated data that isn't in one system, that has to be collated and curated in order to be able to be published using a data tool like AidStream. There are other organizations like my own where I'm working with a big ERP system, and trying to get that to adjust to the standard can be very challenging. I brought it up in a different session, but of those 1,200 publishers, most of us are not OECD DAC reporters. You know, those code lists by which IATI is asking us to code our data are foreign to many of us. And even if we understand them, our systems and data and our business way of doing things may not naturally fit into those groups. And so I know, again, at IOM, when we started this journey, trying to figure out our DAC purpose codes for all of our activities, no one had we aren't an OECD DAC reporter. We didn't know what all of those codes meant in detail because we weren't practitioners with them. And we had to go through and ask our people that knew more about our internally displaced people, where does that go? You know, health. Well, we're providing, you know, how does that work? And so it took time, and it's not something that just happened overnight. I can imagine for smaller organizations, it's only 10 times worse because you might not have the human resources. Again, I was brought into IOM exclusively to deal with IATI. I'm one of the few that gets to do that. And I say gets, I don't know if it's necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, but it is where I got to focus. And but with all of those challenges said, I think that we don't, the key is we don't give up hope. There is definitely ways to crack this nut and to keep the boat afloat as we move forward. This session, as I mentioned, is one of them, is one way. I think improved guidance that we are working on, you'll notice if you're in the community chats, you'll notice that there are different pieces and elements of the IATI standard that are being looked at in depth and trying to provide guidance that's more clear. And I think that guidance, what's key is to include, and this might lend off of what Johanna mentions, is make sure that we know in that guidance what the data user is expecting from that, not just what the XML structure is, but really why that particular element is key. Even if it's not listed on the dashboard, it's not part of the statistics that are out there, but why that, as Henry pointed out, location is really key. And I've heard that many times over the course of my journey here at IATI, that location matters. Now, I know my organization, we struggle with that as a humanitarian provider of aid. Sometimes that can be a security issue. And so we really won't go to the level of detail that Henry would want for the work he's doing. But that could be a bilateral discussion as well. And I think those kinds of understandings are key when we're trying to publish data to understand what it is that the data users need. I think continued focus on traceability is going to be key. Because as Henry points out, again, there's a lot of us along the food chain. I know there's comments in the chat here about using blockchain. I'm a finance person and I probably should know more about it than I should, or than I do, but that scares me. I mean, IATI is hard enough for me to figure out at this point, but the reality is I think we really need to work on traceability because as Henry also pointed out, aid and finance type are really key. But as someone who is not a provider of aid from a government, we don't track ODA. That isn't IOM's world. If ODA and knowing whether or not it is ODA or the finance type is important, by the time it's come from a donor government, I'm going to call Melinda out here. If Sweden is giving IOM some money and it's ODA, and then I'm passing it on to an implementing partner, by the time the implementing partner gets to it, they may or may not know whether or not that was ODA, because I may or may not know that. So one thing I think for sure, the bilateral agreements where the aid kind of starts at the top needs to be a lot of discussion about what information is in our grant agreements so that we know, is it ODA? What's the financing type? What's the references that we should be using for traceability? And believe it or not, that can be very painful to adjust agreements to include some basic data because the negotiation of template agreements and the negotiation of grant agreements is done by a whole different group of people than those of us that are in the trenches in IATI. And I think, again, we really do, as publishers of data, it is on our backs and the monkey is on our back to break down some of those silos within our organizations to ensure that the people that are doing some of the, whether it's the negotiation of agreements, or it's the data itself in the system, or it's the publishing process, those can be very different. And we aren't always talking to one another. And those silos within the publisher's world are definitely something we have to take on the responsibility of breaking down. Cool. And the last way forward, I think, is bilateral or multilateral discussions. And what's nice about that is what we're moving into right now is a discussion on how some bilateral communication between a publisher and a user solved a problem that they had. So I think without some major, aha moment, I think what we're going to see next is definitely the way forward for a lot of us in the short term. And I turn it over now to the presenters next, Mark and to Sohir. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Michelle. I just wanted to point out a few quick things before Mark and Sohir come in for the last presentation. I think it's really important what you pointed out, that this, again, is just the beginning of the journey, and we should see this as really just the first in a series of discussions about how we, make progress. And I think your point on, publishers also being data users, so looking also at the data users as kind of a broad field that also, importantly includes partner country governments and other national stakeholders, but that also currently publishers are a key data user at this point as well. And then I just wanted to note, I think we will try to post the link in the chat, but just because Michelle referenced, traceability as really essential to improving the quality of data, we do have a consultation going on right now in EADI Connect about guidance on traceability. So we really want publishers, data users, everyone to really comment on that consultation to help us kind of shape how we do traceability guidance going forward in EADI. So just wanted to note those things quickly. So we will turn over now to our colleagues Mark and Sohir for the final presentation of the session, and then hopefully we should have a bit of time at the end to talk about how to tangibly take maybe some of these ideas forward. So over to Mark and Sohir.
Thanks a lot, Anna, and thanks a lot to all the presenters so far for all of your presentations and all of your insights as well. My name is Mark Brough. I am an advisor with the Overseas Development Institute on our Budget Strengthening Initiative program in Liberia. We support the Ministry of Finance and Development Planning through demand-driven technical assistance on a range of different issues around public financial management. And I focus particularly on aid management. I've been in Liberia for the last month and just been back the last couple of weeks here. We focus this time particularly on trying to improve the quality of the data captured in the government system, which is the Liberia Project Dashboards. And I'm going to talk a little bit also with Sohir about how we did this, focusing particularly on the African Development Bank data. Very high level overview of the context. It's a big and challenging task in Liberia. The volume of aid in Liberia is about 100%, is equivalent to about 100% of the government's own budgets. And in the past it's been even higher. So you can imagine that making aid work well in Liberia is a really important task. And it's very challenging as well because there are lots of different donors running a large number of different projects. And at the same time, there's a relatively small aid management and coordination unit with limited resources responsible for this task. I've just added at the bottom here, the Liberian fiscal year runs July to June. From next year, it's going to shift from January to December. And the reason why I think this is relevant to mention is because there are a number of publishers that are currently publishing data, aggregated by year or broken down in different ways that make it very challenging to use when you don't have a fiscal year that runs according to the calendar year. So we really, this is, just, I guess my main thing to say up front is really a plea to make sure publishers look at your data and make sure that you are breaking your data down within each year. Okay, so when we were looking at the AFDB data specifically, there were a couple of challenges that we faced. One of the challenges is that there are a number of different funding instruments that go into each AFDB project normally. And so this can be different sorts of loans that maybe can begin at different times. It's important to know how much of different loans have been dispersed and how much are remaining. And there can also be a mixture of grant and loan. And it's important to have this breakdown of information. This is already captured by the government, but it wasn't captured in the IIT data, and this is what we needed to get included there as well. So far, and to date, when the government was capturing data from the AFDB, normally they received a PDF each quarter containing disbursement reports, and this was basically like a statement of accounts. This information then had to be manually transcribed into the government's own system, normally through, we had like Excel spreadsheets that we can generate from the system as templates that to try and kind of simplify a little bit of the data entry process, but again, they're coming from these PDFs originally. So the initial focus for IIT imports, two things. Firstly, focusing on large donors' data. It might be interesting later to look at smaller organizations as well, but initially we're just trying to focus on the largest donors to get this first level, the sort of top level of data captured in a good way in the system. So initially this is African Development Bank, the EU, Sweden, USAID, and the World Bank are the 5 that we're focusing on to start with to get their IT data into the system. We're also interested, firstly, mostly in financial data. And the reason for this is because the government is already capturing this kind of data. So the aim is to basically improve the way that this information is being captured and to capture it much more quickly as well. So we want quarterly disbursement data, so for the previous quarter, and then annual forward projections for the next year and preferably the next 3 years forward, what each donor is planning to spend. So just show you what the data roughly looks like at the moment. So actually I neglected in this slides to include a link to the dashboard itself, which I can paste in the chat afterwards, but it's liberiaprojects.org. It's now public actually since last September. So this is for one project, and in the system we basically have these different components of this one project. These are only actually, I think there's 3 components for this particular project, which is a road project in the southeast of the country. And here we have on the top one, this is a grant component, and the bottom is a loan component. And so you can see, we have these graphs kind of showing how much has been dispersed so far. And one of the challenges is they show commitments, disbursements, and MTEF projections, which are basically forward budgets in IIT speak. And one of the challenges with this is basically when we have these different components in the system, it can get very confusing, but it's also a kind of a clear way of actually being able to capture the data broken down by component. What we want to be able to do though is to be able to put this all together so that we have a single graph for the same project that shows all of the commitments, disbursements, and the forward projections, and still be able to show the breakdown by grant and loan, and to show the breakdown by different loans. So this is what we were trying to do with IIT. And now I'm going to pass to So here to say, what we did to basically get AFDB's data into the right shape that we could then import it.
Thank you, Mark. So as a publisher, what did it mean? So it was a work we were talking about over the course of the year. As a publisher, what was important was to understand the partner country needs, but the IT needs as well. How we can change the Yati XML to make it with a nice format to be extracted through the platform. So we did a number of small technical improvements that had a big impact, like for example, adding the transaction reference for each of the disbursements. We used to do it only at the commitment level, but we added it to all the financial transactions. So, and of course, being committed and having time to chat and review and exchange with Mark, check the discrepancies, check with the finance department, and yeah, that was a bit challenging, but really, really nice to then when you see the final graphs.
And so yeah. So the findings, so we were able to get much more complete and accurate data. So we did find, interestingly, in some cases, when we imported the data from AFDB, the graph was actually identical, which was kind of amazing that all of this kind of very tough kind of transcription work, transcribing out of PDFs and entering the data, into the system, actually did result sometimes in having, identical data to what was in IIT. In some ways, that's kind of reassuring, but also I think amazing to see that could work sometimes. But we also found, obviously, discrepancies. In trying to do all this, you're bound to have some human error when you're manually entering the data. But also, we could find maybe sometimes some discrepancies in the way the data have been published in IIT as well. So we were able to, between the two systems, work out maybe where the issue was. We could import data and represent these complex data much more easily and very quickly. And after checks, so after checking project documents and seeing, where things made sense, the import took only about 5 minutes per project. And the advantage then of this also is that the ongoing import, updating data every night, this doesn't cost anything, right? And you need to kind of check the data and do some validation every now and then, but you don't have to do all this manual transcription. And this is to show where we got to. So on the left-hand side, so this is just 2 screenshots of the same project. And this is this large road project that's operating in the southeast of the country, Fishtown Harper Road project. And you can see on the right-hand side the total kind of graph, which now is all clean. It all makes sense. You've got the commitments are higher than the MTEF projections or the budgets, and the disbursements are gradually going up. And then we can also see the breakdown by fund source. So we can see here at the top, this is the loan, and below there's another loan for the Nigerian Trust Fund, And then below that, we have the grant for the transition support facility, I think it's called. Final thoughts on this. This was time-consuming work to do, both for the government, and me supporting the government, and also for Sohair. But I think it's important to say also that publishers, and this is not only the case for AFDB, but several of the other publishers that I've been in contact with also, that I named at the start, have been very responsive to requests and to reaching out to them. And so I think it's important to bear this in mind, that it's time-consuming on both sides, but also there is a lot of goodwill, I think, there to kind of make these improvements. So I think it's kind of, the message I think generally is, do reach out to people and try and make this work. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Thanks, Sohair. I think that's really interesting because it looks like, this is tangibly making progress and pushing things forward and solving things. And I think it's really interesting to hear like how this is all coming together and how the partnership worked. And obviously that's what we're trying to do with this kind of session and setting a groundwork for more of that to happen within IADI with all our partners. Thanks for that really good presentation. I think we only have about 5 minutes left in the session, and I know there are a couple questions that people are kind of raising in the chat. But there was one really quick and dirty one that I wanted to kind of bring up first that I think is in response to Mark and Sohair's presentation. That was from, I believe from Michelle, asking, I think this is in reference to publishing, asking from the kind of partner country government perspective, is quarterly publishing, Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the question is quarterly publishing sufficient from the partner country government perspective, or is monthly kind of preferred?
It was actually in relation, to Mark's comment about the fiscal patterns. And if you don't end on fiscal patterns, you can build up a fiscal pattern on quarters, or do we really have to deal with months because they're not even falling on a calendar quarter?
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Sorry.
No, perfect.
I'm happy to put a quick on this one. So in Liberia at the moment, the publishing or the data collection cycle is quarterly, and we ask for the data 2 weeks after the close of the quarter as well. So there's something important there, I think, also in terms of how quickly after the close of the quarter can you get your data published in IATI. This is just to get the data to be as similar as possible to the data that's currently being collected manually right at country level. This is the minimum bar, right? The minimum that we need to be able to meet to switch into using IATI. But to actually use the data to improve the way that the resources are being managed, I would definitely argue that monthly data is important, because 3 months, if there are maybe some issues with disbursement delays or whatever in a project, then 3 months is quite a long time maybe to not be spotting that particular issue. And so I think if you have the monthly data, then you can start to manage things in a much more real-time way, rather than just being able to look backwards and say, well, okay, this wasn't working, a while ago. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And I think in the last 2 minutes we have, I think there was some interest around David's question about whether or not IADI is the right platform for local activity transparency. So David, I don't know if you have additional comments here, or if anyone wants to kind of come in and build on that in the last kind of 2 minutes we have. I will say also that this is potentially something we could bring to IADI Connect and open up with the wider community, but any comments on that while we still have 2 minutes?
I'd love to take those 2 minutes to hear from anyone in aid recipient countries about what platforms they use to find out about local activities. If you're looking for more detailed information you can get from IADI, where do you go? In Nigeria, for instance, do you go to the OCHA 3W? Do you go to government ministries who've registered local NGOs, community-based organizations? Do you go to NGO consortiums? I'm just curious what the other sources are besides IADI.
Maybe people are flagging since it's the end of the day.
I think so. We'll take it up on Connect.
For sure, I think so. I think this is a really interesting conversation that actually would really benefit from maybe being on Connect and being opened up wider than just this group in the room. So David, maybe my colleague Sandra and I can be in touch with you afterward, and we can help kind of put something together for the wider community and kind of send that out as one of the follow-ups from this to kind of get that conversation started. So we'd be happy to do that.
Sounds perfect. And I shared my email in the chat. So please, anyone interested in continuing the conversation, reach out. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Great. Well, guys, we're out of time, but I just wanted to reiterate, I think this is not, the end of the discussion. This is really just a beginning. So again, I think IADI Connect is the main way that we as a community are, in touch with each other in between these kind of exchanges. So I think we'll look to maybe bring this conversation again on these kind of bridging needs between data use and data quality to IADI Connect, so that there's not a gap in this conversation, and that we keep the conversation going forward about how we can actually be tangible and how we can really make progress on these really important issues. So I think given that we're out of time for today, we'll definitely try to get that conversation started on Connect, and also the conversation that David has brought up as well.